Okay, we're back with the rebuilding of the fork and fitting the new seal and refilling with oil. And we're doing this on the right hand fork leg. Now the reason for this is I did do it and video it on the left hand fork leg, but in between filming everything and arranging everything I kind of lost the light somewhere in the middle there, and accordingly the video is a bit dark. So basically I'm just going to run through the whole refitting of the new seal procedure with the right hand fork leg and refilling with oil. And just as a matter of interest, I did mention that in the owner's manual it stated that these units that are built into the fork stanchion are one is sprung and one isn't. This one, the right fork leg, is compression and the left controls rebound. Now as it turns out, both of these are sprung units, so I don't know if mine's something a little different maybe, or if it was just specific Mito models that were like that. But anyway, what we've got here is the fork leg, the stanchion, and you can't really tell as such, but what I've done is I've got a piece of 600 grit wet and dry, lubricated with WD-40 or a light oil, anything will do like that, and I've just given the whole stanchion a swipe over with that just to make sure that it's all nice and smooth, and to smooth off any imperfections that might be there, and then a good wipe clean to make sure that there's no grit or dust left on here that can damage the new fork seal. We've got the fork tube, the upper portion. This of course would be the lower if it was a right way up fork, and that's been given a clean out inside, and I've tapped out, checked and cleaned the bushings and the tube in there. We've got just over 400ml of fresh nicely coloured cherryade coloured red fork oil. We've got the thick washer, the base washer. We've got the new fork seal and the spring clip that retains it, and the dust seal, which has been thoroughly cleaned up and inspected and checked for any splits or debris or what have you. If this is damaged, you need to replace this as well as the fork seal, because this does perform an essential task in keeping the nasty gritty dusty muck out of the inner workings of here, and getting wedged in between your oil seal, your fork oil seal, and the stanchion, and damaging it. So it's important that this is intact, this edge and the inner edge, which it's probably difficult to pick up on here, but there's an inner and an outer edge that act as scraper rings. So as we can see here, you've got the split bushing and a tube which acts as a low stiction bushing as well. They've been pressed into place by hand. You don't need any special tools for any of this, incidentally. The next thing in is the washer. Now it has a flat side and a curved side with with various sort of punch type markings on. The curved side goes uppermost and it just drops into place like so. The next thing to go in is the new fork seal. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a wipe around, and then a dollop of ordinary grease or red rubber grease or even fork oil or anything of that type will be fine, just around the outside lip of the seal, as you can see there. This is just going to help it drive in and seat nicely. And then before you put this in as well, just to mention, you need to just run your finger around the inside seating face, just the seating face. It doesn't matter if slightly above where the spring clip goes or anything else is a little marked up, as this is obviously from previous removals of the spring clip, because that spring clip is very awkward to remove. It's the seating face has to be smooth with no chunks missing, no divots or anything like that. And if somebody's been ham-fisted in removing a seal in the past, that could easily have occurred. Because you don't use the slide hammer technique to remove these, that could happen quite easily. So we'll put that in as squarely as we possibly can. Now because you put these seals in before you put the stanchions in, on a normal seal you'd have to slide everything. You have to slide the whole thing onto the stanchion, then put it in place, and you'd then need a seal driver to wrap around this to tap the new seal into place. Now what I've got here, something you can do on, you can do this on a right way up fork around the stanchion, and you can do this on a fork like this. You cannot do it on an upside down fork where you have to put the stanchion in first. And what I'm talking about is using your old oil seal as a driver to seat your new oil seal in. The oil seals have a stiff outer ring, as you can see here, and a more flexible inner ring which provides the oil sealing purpose. Now when you tap in your new fork oil seal, you need to tap it in around the outer circumference, because this is the stiff part, and if you try hitting it in the middle, it's just going to flex and bend and distort and not go properly. Now what you can do is use one or two of these stacked up together as a fork seal driver. So you can put that in there and just hit them square on with a mallet. You can do this also, as I said, on a right way up fork by sliding it over the stanchion and just tapping around, and I have done that in the past if I've not had an appropriate seal driver. The other thing you can do regarding a seal driver is using a piece of 40mm plastic drain pipe, cut a couple of lengths about hand width, just a little wider, one slightly longer than the other. What this enables you to do is with the longer one around the shorter one, you can gap that accordingly. You can clip the short one around your fork stanchion and then clip the long one around the one that's around your fork stanchion, if you see what I mean, like that, but with your fork stanchion in the middle. This will then allow you to use that as a driver to drive in your new fork seal with this outer surface bearing on the outer ring of your new fork seal. And what you can then do is swap them round and use the smaller one to drive bushings in if you need to drive in a new bushing onto a fork leg. So that's quite a useful little tool, very simply made from a little bit of scrap off cut 40mm PVC pipe. I'll not be using that today, but I mean essentially what you would do is, imagine that was round the fork stanchion, you would put that round there and that would be spread a little more because it would be round the stanchion. That would bear on the outer surface and you would literally use it like a slide hammer and tap it down. Okay, so we've got that in as square as we can. You then take one of your old fork seals, popping that onto the top, and normally use a bit of wood, but I don't have one to hand. And then hitting that as squarely as possible, you drive in the fork seal and you will be able to see as it's getting closer to the washer underneath. Now this is where the second one comes in handy, because often you'll need just that extra little bit of room, so you put the second one in place. The old seal should pop out quite easily, like you see there. Now you can see that washer still lifts and rotates a little, so you can see that that's not fully seated. You can also see that it's not fully clearing the snap ring groove, so that needs to go in a little further. And that's pretty much it. I'm just going to give that another little tap in a moment just to make sure it's fully seated. But you can see there, hopefully, there's no lift in that thick washer. You can't rotate it. I can just feel it moving ever so slightly, so I'm just going to tap that down a little further. And you can see that the seal edge has now cleared the snap ring groove, which is what retains this. The thing about this is you don't even need to save your old fork seals, because of course when you renew your fork seals, you always renew them as a pair, so you'll always have a couple of fork seals. So if you have a fork that you can drive your seals in using this method, then you don't even need to have old ones kicking around in your toolbox taking up space, because you'll get a couple of fresh ones each time you do your fork seals. But you can see there, that's firm now, it's not moving anywhere. You can actually physically see that the outer part of the seal is bearing down on that. So what we do next is we take our spring clip and insert the closed end, if you can see what I'm doing here, like so. And if you then take a screwdriver or a pair of pliers or anything along that these lines, and feed in one end first, and you'll hear it snap into place. Let's see if I can get it so I can show you that. Actually, it's a little tricky if I've nothing to press down on, but hopefully. So just use the edge of your screwdriver there there you go, that's one end in. Then what you do with the other end is you literally just walk it round like so. Now normally you'll have a spring clip which is far easier to put in and take out. This is more like a piston ring, and therefore a little trickier, but fitting it's easy. But you see that snap in there, and just make sure that's well seated. Just take the end of your screwdriver like so and just give it a good shove around and make sure that it's seated in that groove nicely. So there you go. Next thing on is going to be your dust seal, but rather than put this directly onto here, we're going to lubricate the inner lip, both of the inner lips of this, and slide it onto the fork stanchion down here in that direction. Now these fork stanchions, because they're designed to come apart in this way, actually have a very slight taper up at the top here, which is where where your outer bushing would be, or the bushing that slides in the outer fork leg rather. So we're going to lubricate that, slide it down onto there, fit the fork leg back in after lubricating the inner seal here, and then refill it with oil. So instead of me talking about it, let's get on with that. Little dab of grease around the inside of both lips, not too much because you don't want this caked in the stuff, which is just going to help attract grit and hold it in place there, so just a little bit. And slide that onto the fork stanchion using a twisting motion to make sure it seats properly, and slide it down the stanchion. We then take a bit of fork oil, just dip your finger into the pot there and wipe that around the inner ring of the fork seal. Now this will help the stanchion slide properly into the fork seal and seat without curling up the edges and damaging it. At this point, take your fork stanchion, drop the tube through carefully, get that so it's centered, and just kind of twist it and rock it a little bit, and you'll feel that. There you go, just slot into place like so, slide down, and at that point you can snap the dust cover into place. At this point here, we're going to refill the fork leg. Now I think I'm actually going to put this down on the floor so I can, because that way I can see more easily what I'm doing. that's a little better. Right, what we're doing here is we're refilling the fork leg with 420cc of fresh 10 weight fork oil as specified per the manual. Just going to put that down a second so I can show you this. Now you'll see inside there you've got the cartridge internals of the stanchion. Now you'll be able to see there you've got the cartridge internals of the stanchion with the little holes around the circumference. What you need to try and do is pour the oil directly down into there. This will fill up the stanchion internals and then eventually will bleed out through the hole at the side, filling the fork leg. If you fill the fork leg first, then it will just fill up quite rapidly and take a while to seep down. So, if that makes sense. So, take your jug of oil, removing any stray cat hairs that might have magically appeared. I don't know how they do that, I really don't. And pour that nice and carefully onto your centre pin of your stanchion, and then that should flow down the holes which go around the circumference. At some point the oil level will exceed the uppermost portion, and at this point you'll need to work the fork leg up and down a little to distribute the oil a bit before you can pour the remainder in. So the trick here is to take your time, don't try and rush it. I don't know if you can see that, but what we've got is a little bit of bubbling there as the oil is sort of seeping through, and we're getting some sort of airlocks along the way, as you would expect when you fill anything with oil. When you're running the fork tube on the stanchion to help distribute the oil, try not to go too far beyond where it would normally sit with the cap in place, which would be about there, or certainly probably a bit lower, but certainly no higher, because of the side hole in the stanchion which overflows the oil through into the fork tube itself. If you expose that, you risk damaging your seal, which you've very carefully fitted, and also pouring your oil all the way down the side of your fork leg. So after you've run a few strokes on that, resume pouring, same as before, just taking your time. And then again, just run some strokes to help distribute that a little. And as you get towards the end, as you can see here, we're getting to the sort of last bit in the jug. This is where it's going to start bubbling up more rapidly, and you're going to have to wait and let that settle in between pourings a bit more. But the long and short of this, the key to refilling a fork with fork oil is don't be in a hurry. Because the last thing you want to do is make a big oily mess of all your hard work so far. And there you have it. I'll just let that settle out a moment. You can see how it's filled right up there. This will settle down below the stanchion momentarily, and with the units with the spring in, you cannot actually check the air gap. Hence the reason you're supposed to check it on the left fork leg, which is what I was going to show you. But as it turns out, these fork leg units are both happen to be the same. Now you can see there how that's gone down. You can still hear that bubbling a little bit if I tip it, as the air's sort of replacing the oil. Let's make sure I've got the very last bits out. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's as much as we're getting out of there, that's fine. So if you can't check the air gap for any reason, just fill to the specified amount according to the manual. Some forks you can, some you can't, it's as simple as that. And the ones that you can, always give the air gap a check. It's easy enough to do using either. I'll just sort of demonstrate how you would roughly do it. But what you can do is use a vernier caliper like so. Now the air gap on this one is 60mm, I believe, so if you move your measure it 6 centimeters like so, and you basically set this inside your fork, and this should just be touching your oil, which I can see it's around about there, possibly a smidge higher, but then because of the fork internals and what have you. So you can do that with a vernier caliper. You can also do it with a piece of wire. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. A piece of wire, put a mark on and hold it down, or put a bend at the correct height, and provided that you're not sort of dipping right into the oil, as long as it's just on the tip of your piece of wire or your vernier caliper, then you've got the right level. So we're pretty much done with this. I'll just run a few more strokes just to make sure that's nicely distributed. And the next step is to replace our top cap, which we've given a quick wipe over and clean. And it's important with a fork, with any fork that you rebuild, that everything's spotless when it goes back in. It's a sealed unit and it needs to be absolutely spotless, so give everything a good clean. Now this here, you've got a flat side and you've got a dish side. The dish side goes to the top like so, and simply drops right down on top of there. You then have two split collets, just like a poppet valve in a cylinder head. One either side in this little groove is all you need. And then if you raise your fork leg while holding that, hang on a sec, it's a little tricky, they will drop into there like so, and that seals everything in place. Next step is to replace your cap. So we take the cap, similarly give it a good wipe out and a clean the threads, give a quick check and internal clean of the threads as well, just to be on the safe side. And then a dab of grease around the O-ring. This will help this slip as you screw it back in, rather than ripping and tearing. And we wind this in like so. And then get your spanner or wrench, whatever you want to call it, socket or what have you, and wind that down. And you need to nip it up quite tightly. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be swinging off it. It doesn't need to be wrenched on. Just nice and tight, and I'll nip that up once it's clamped back in the forks. So that is pretty much the whole thing. So that's the stripping, cleaning, replacing of the fork seals and replacing of the oil on a Cagiva Mito upside down fork leg. The right way up fork legs of the earlier models are essentially the same process, it's just that everything's upside down. You've got the stanchion on the top and the fork leg on the bottom, and apparently the Aprilia RS125s are also the same. If you have a bike which has preload adjusters and the like, then the only real difference with those is that you'd slacken the preload adjusters right off before you strip anything to make sure that you're not damaging any of the push rods or anything inside. And once that's done, you can just give that a bit of a workout, quick visual inspection, and make sure that your fork leg is clean as it is there.